Good evening, everyone. It's now 5 o'clock and time for the workshop of the Victoria City Council. I will call that to order. Our workshops are informal, and so with that, we'll dive right into our agenda this evening. We do have a full agenda for our workshop this evening, so we'll begin with the first item, which is an update on our transportation improvement projects within the city. And presenting this evening is our city engineer, Kara Guerin. Ms. Guerin, welcome.
Great. Thanks, Mayor, members of the council. This is going to be the first of two workshops that we're going to have on transportation projects. So we're going to cover some tonight and some more at the next council meeting, next council workshop. But Eric Johnson is with us tonight. He is the project manager for Carver County on the Arboretum area transportation project. So he's here tonight. I would expect Lyndon or Darren will be at the next meeting. The topics we're going to cover tonight of the transportation projects that are currently in design are in the box circled in red here. We're going to save the Highway 5 big job for the next council workshop because otherwise you wouldn't get to the other two items on your agenda tonight. So one of the things that I just first wanted to highlight for you all and the members of the public is that the city has created a project page for all the transportation improvements. So under community and under projects, there is a heading for transportation projects where we've assembled the links to all of the various specific project pages for these projects so that our residents can get to them in one place and or council members. This fancy little interactive map, if you click on that, you can learn a little bit more about each of the projects. And then also down below, there's a description and link to the specific project pages. So
that is wonderful and very helpful. Thank
you. People that certainly want to dive deep online for information, there is a lot out there. So wanted to share that before I started to dive in. So the first project that I want to talk about is the intersection of Highway 11 and Pioneer Trail, Marsh Lake Road. So just south of town here. That intersection has been having a lot of challenges with it as traffic has increased in the area. There's been a number of crashes that seem to be becoming more frequent as more development occurs, not just in Victoria, but in Chaska. So traffic, if you've ever driven that intersection and tried to go from Pioneer Trail to Marsh Lake Road and get across there with the steep slope coming down the hill and the speeds of cars moving, we are seeing a pretty big uptick in crashes there. So because of that, the intersection was identified for highway safety improvement funds, and the county was successful in obtaining those to build a roundabout at that intersection. So the intersection, again, is Highway 11, and Marsh Lake Road is a city leg to the west, and then County Road 14, Pioneer Trail to the east. So that project is currently in the design phase, and it's scheduled for construction in 2024, likely fall of 2024. So this is just a snapshot of the layout as it sits today. It's still in the design phase, so elements are being refined as the process moves through the design elements. One of the things that I wanted to highlight here is the fact that the plan does include looking at pedestrian connectivity and trail connections through the area. So as part of the design phase, the design team is planning for trail connections, but we'll have to make a decision, both ourselves and the county, about whether or not we have the funding or resources to construct those trails today. As an example, this little inset over here on the left would be a trail connection from Laketown 13th down to what would tie into the intersection. That's not currently in our budget, currently planned for funding, but we've all learned through the last few years that building trails in conjunction with transportation projects is significantly more cost effective than building them after the fact. So we're going through the design work. We're anticipating having a cost estimate soon, which will help us work through that decision. We might decide that we want to have an alternate bid to see what the actual bid costs would be to build that trail piece. Alternatively, if it's not something that we feel we can afford today, we certainly could plan to have that constructed with development when the Schmieg property, if and when the Schmieg property were to develop. So essentially, we're looking in the design phase to keep all of our options on the table. At a minimum, if we decide we can't fund the actual trail construction, the right-of-way would be graded such to minimize the cost of adding the trail after the fact. So if you remember, for some of the other trail pieces we've worked on, that's where it gets really expensive, is if there's steep slopes off the end of the road and there isn't, a flat area to locate that trail in the area, or if the drainage is in the way. So for sure, will be set up to construct the trail at a future date if we decide we can't just get it done right away. Certainly going back to this map, so we've built the portion of the trail along 11 adjacent to the Hunters Brook and Marsh Hollow developments. If we could get this gap closed and get folks connected up to the Laketown neighborhood, it certainly would be a welcome connection for folks from the south as we continue to grow in that direction. So that's something we're working pretty closely with the project team on working through. So while the project does have funding towards it, the funding doesn't cover 100% of the costs. So the city, as having jurisdiction over Marsh Lake Road, will have a cost share on this project. That's built into our capital improvement plan. It's built into the financing plan that we've been working with Trish on to make sure we're ready when these projects come forward. We would anticipate that we would be using state aid funds for the city's share of that leg. But like I said, I don't have a detailed estimate yet. So once we have an updated estimate, then we'll start to work through some of those budget questions in a finer grain detail, and certainly bring that back for further discussion. As noted, this is a 24 project. So of all the transportation projects we're talking about, this one's coming the soonest. So you will likely see more on this sooner than you might on some of the other projects.
Kara, let's talk for a minute about Marsh Lake Road.
Yes.
So we had reconstructed Marsh Lake Road a few years back, and to a city street standard as opposed to a county road. Now that we are bringing this roundabout, into reality, are there improvements that are going to need to be done on Marsh Lake Road? How far down the road do they go?
So generally what will need to be rebuilt to tie into the roundabout is not significant. It's, 500, 600, 700 feet. And when we did put our utilities in the ground as part of that project, even though we weren't proceeding with the county road improvements, we knew a roundabout was planned in this location, so we were sure to locate our utilities out of the way of the roundabout. So it's not, so far at this stage of design, it's not looking like we have any impacts to our infrastructure. Aside from that, we don't have any planned improvements to Marsh Lake Road, and anticipate that becoming a situation until such time as traffic might significantly increase on the road. So as a reminder, it's still in the county's long-range plan to be an extension of County Road 14, but basically based on the input from the city council, it's not planned for a specific time. The traffic projections on Marsh Lake Road aren't really all that significant until we see significant development in our western growth area towards Waconia. Okay. And who knows when that'll occur, which was part of the challenge with the discussion at the time the Marsh Lake Road project moved forward.
Okay, so no big hurdles as far as putting this roundabout in. Okay,
correct.
Right.
I think that's, yeah. So before I move on from this one, I do want to check if there's any other questions.
I was just curious. Obviously, I know it takes a lot of time to design and get to a point where we're ready to actually start building this. How does it factor in? Obviously, There's a lot of displaced traffic when we just did the median. I'm just curious, like, do we take into account if it's possible to do it before schools start, right? Because obviously that's a lot more traffic using those roads during that time.
Yeah, so because of the type of funding that's involved in this project, it does require a federal process, which makes things more complicated than what we can typically do on a city project. Typically, we can deliver something relatively quickly. So the project timeline does need to go through an environmental review process that takes a little bit longer. So we're still trying to get that schedule refined, but yeah, we are anticipating another closure in this area, which will be a challenge for the public as we get this thing constructed. On the flip side, when you look at all the planned improvements in the county, we want to get this thing done before the 25 construction talk starts on these other locations. So, we're certainly mindful of that, but we're going to run into some challenges with that.
And then just curious, how long does do you have a rough estimate of like how long a project like this takes?
We don't have a specific timeline yet, so certainly when we talk about it next time, we'll likely have what staging might look like or how long the closure could be. Because there's no utilities, it can be a relatively quicker process, but the 11 South with the median took longer than it should have due to some utility conflicts. So I do know the project team is trying to get ahead of working through those utility conflicts with like gas, electric, those folks, because that certainly hindered us on the 11 South project and made that thing take longer than all of us would have liked to have witnessed.
Other questions on this before we move on?
How well
Councilmember
is
Gunderson.
this built for growth?
It is, there is no need to widen 11 to 4-lane. So adding the median does improve the traffic capacity for 11 as we go south, which is when we really start to see the volumes jump up when you have the folks from Chaska and then our growth area tying in south. So this should be able to serve the city well into the future.
Any other questions? All right, very good. Carry on.
One other thing I'll just highlight about this one, and as you start thinking about it now, as you drive through it, the grades are a challenge. So that's part of what's going to drive that need to close the road. They are going to have to do quite a bit of grading. Right now you're coming down a hill, coming into an intersection, and then down. We need to get that in the right vertical location to improve safety through there. The one other note, too, that I would add is this is a county-led project, so the county is leading the property acquisition for it. So the city isn't involved in any of those conversations as they work through acquiring the property from the adjacent property owners. All right. The next county project I'm going to just briefly cover is Highway 11 north of Carver Park Reserve, north of the 13.5 acres adjacent to Carver Park Reserve. So we're talking about, the 13.5 acres is down here. This is a planned pavement preservation project for the county between essentially where the next project we talk about ends all the way up to 7. So as part of that, the county will be doing some shoulder widening and some safety improvements. So there's some pretty tight curvature around that area. No shoulders, no turn lanes. So the county is leading that project and is in the design process right now to work through that. I don't expect you to see this layout. It's just a snapshot so you can have an idea of what a layout might look like. But the county is really working very closely with the Carver Park Reserve team to minimize impacts. So there isn't right-of-way available to the county along that whole corridor, so right-of-way will need to be obtained from the Park District. And that can get quite complicated based on the type of land that exists there and their ability to even grant right-of-way for certain types of things. So they're working together to strike that right balance of where the road gets widened and where there's shoulder widening and whatnot. But one of the exciting things that occurred through the process is a desire by both the county and the Park District, support from the Park District to get a trail connection from the 13.5 acres up to like the Lowry Nature Center. I almost said Carpenter Nature Center. I'm like, that's not in Carver County. So getting connectivity up to their trail system that ties into the campground too. So what the joint effort that's been discussed between the parties would be the county funding the trail, the Park District providing the land rights to construct the trail in an easement on their property, and then the city coming to the table to help with maintenance. And what we refer to for maintenance in this scenario is snow removal, mowing of weeds. You know, we do a mowing swath along either side of the trail. The county would still be responsible for like capital maintenance, so pavement replacement, pavement management, but they wouldn't be equipped to go do snow removal on a trail like that. Just so within the city of Victoria, we maintain all the trails for the county that are within the city for obvious reasons that we're better equipped to do that work. So we're still in the design phase. We're still working through what that looks like. We don't know that it's 100% sure thing, but all of the work to date is looking favorable that we'll be able to continue to work in that direction and hopefully be able to include that element in this project. They have had one open house on this project. They did it in conjunction with our open house on the 5 and 11 improvements, and the public was really excited about the prospect of having that trail connection be something that we could tie into. A couple other things I did just want to note. The city has a lift station that serves the property within the city limits out by like Wisteria Street. That lift station is in need of replacement. It has a small diameter force main that runs under County Road 11. So probably in December, the city council authorized us to do design work for replacement of that lift station. The intent would be that we want to be doing that work in conjunction with this road project so that any impacts to pavement, we wouldn't have to do that as a standalone project. So that design is underway, as noted when we talked about it in December, but the intent would be that then our plans, what we need to do to improve those utilities would be rolled into this bid package so the work can happen at once, so we aren't disrupting the road twice.
So you're still in design on this project. So do you have any estimate as when this work would take place?
So this one is scheduled for 2025. So the intent would be to have that occur in conjunction or coordinated with the 5 and 11 project, which is what we'll talk about next to try to coordinate those closures. So yeah, the county, when you look at the map that Kendra prepared, the county does have their hands full in figuring out the puzzle piece of construction impacts and timing to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where we can't get in or out of Victoria because we've put everything under construction at every key entry and exit point. So the intent would be to get this one done before the big job happens to the east. Any other questions on this one?
All right, very good.
All right, moving on. So the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan, this graphic, you've all, I'm sure, seen. We take it and hand it out at public events. It's very handy because it helps highlight all the projects that are coming. But out of the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan, there are 4, but I'm going to focus on 3 projects planned. In blue is the 5 and 11 project that we're going to talk about here tonight. The city is leading that project. We call it the Big 5 job, are all the roads shown in green. The county and Eric here has the pleasure of leading that project. We're going to talk about that at next meeting, and then we'll also talk about the County Road 18 82nd Street project at our next meeting. So tonight we're going to focus on the 5 and 11 project. So, specifically we're talking about improvements at the intersection of 5 and 11. That really was the catalyst. So the county was successful in getting funding for a roundabout at that intersection, but we didn't really want to just only improve the intersection with everything that's happening in the area with the 13.5 acres and need to improve 11 as well as 5. We're looking at a broader project area than just the intersection. So the The city is leading this project for two reasons. One, the county needed some assistance in terms of not being able to lead every project under the sun all at the exact same time in the county. And then with impacts to the 13.5 acres, as well as our existing businesses in the area, we felt that it would be important for the city to really be at the table for this project. So in terms of schedule of where we are, the project was kicked off late summer and early fall, really with data analysis, traffic collection, developing corridor design alternatives, and we took those, we had a meeting, we had two meetings with the property owners who are immediately affected by the project, one early on just to get some input. What are your access needs to this area? And what are your concerns with any potential project in the area? And then once we had some concepts drawn, we shared those with the property owners as well as in an open house on November 15th. So since that open house time, the project team's really been working on coming up with a refined preferred alternative for the corridor. So what you're seeing here tonight is the current snapshot of the refined layout, but it's still a work in process. So we're continuing to work with all the affected agencies, so MnDOT and the many, many people in MnDOT who need to weigh in on improvements on a trunk highway, and then as well as just working through agency process elements. So originally I was thinking I was only going to show you the alternatives that we had at the open house, but because we had an updated layout, I'm going to walk through that one. But in terms of where we are, we're trying to get a preferred alternative dialed in, and then we'll have another open house in the spring to let the property owners and the public know where we landed. The intent is to be constructing this in 2025. So roundabout at Marsh Lake Road in 2024, this one in 2025, so that we're wrapping up with construction on this one before we start working on the big 82nd Street and the Big 5 job. So in terms of the, a couple of things that I want to highlight, really just relative to the area. So over the years, there's been a lot of conversation around just the 13.5 acres and what access might need to be for the 13.5 acres. But this is really the first time that we've really dialed into looking at the whole, I'm going to call it neighborhood. So how does traffic and access interact with all of the businesses in this corridor? So, we have existing businesses that exist today that have full access to the highway, and needing to understand how the whole vision fits together as a whole. And then, of course, we have Dairy Queen and the vet clinic site and the daycare. And then really, somewhat interesting, you have 3 individual property owners who have single-family homes also accessing County Road 11 in the same area. So the project team really took a look at everything collectively and looked at a gazillion different alternatives for access and roundabout layouts and roundabout footprints and how does it fit and where does it fit, doesn't it fit. So really have been working through that process. So the Southside property owners do need to have full access to their existing businesses. So let me describe it this way. If we put a median along 5 between the bridge and the intersection, the people going to Site 1 landscaping, they get truck deliveries, they get landscaping deliveries. They need to be able to take a left turn out. If we put a median along that section and they could only make a right-hand turn, how are they going to get to Waconia? Because there isn't a U-turn place. We wouldn't want those trucks having to divert through downtown Victoria to get up and around. So a bunch of different layouts were looked at to figure out how to accommodate that. Another example, the property owner for the Galvadoc site recognized that really the south side of Highway 5 probably will redevelop at some future point in time. as the 13 and a half acres develops. So he was interested in making sure that whatever layout there would provide a plan for long-term access. So with the roundabout footprint, what we're envisioning here is that at such time as the south property owners would redevelop, there'd be an opportunity to add a fourth leg to the roundabout. So certainly under that scenario, these property owners are working together in conjunction on a redevelopment plan. So, this is not tomorrow. This would be into the future if and when they all decided they wanted to do something different. But that was important to work through. Dairy Queen, we've been working through refinements in the layout to accomplish two things: maintain their current access to the site, not that really unsafe location that's right by the intersection that people cut through. So this current version shows a driveway entrance further to the east of where it is today and maintains an access onto 11. But what was important to them was still being maintained their drive-through. So the project team's been working on refinements to try to make sure we can fit it in, accommodate their existing drive-through. None of those things are finalized yet, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of some of the challenges that the project team is working with the existing properties. And then certainly too, for the folks who are along 11, not necessarily wanting to be in a situation where they have to back out to a highway, is there an opportunity to get them safely onto County Road 11, and what does that look like over time? So through all of that, the other idea that had been brought forward by the county was adding another roundabout at the Steiger Lake Lane entrance. So all of the previous plans just showed a T intersection there, and really adding this roundabout here really improves accessibility to downtown through that location. You aren't, stopped at a T intersection waiting a turn. Traffic can move pretty freely through there. The other important element that I wanted to just highlight too that has been something the city has talked about for quite some time is really wanting to change the vision for 5 once you hit the roundabout to slow down traffic. So right now, the 55 mile an hour speed change happens west of the bridge. We really want 5 from the roundabout to be downtown-like. So low speed, urban. So what does that design need to be to really minimize speeds through the corridor and have you know that you're entering into downtown Victoria, that this is a change in condition? And MnDOT's been very supportive of us working to accomplish that goal through this project. What that means from a technical perspective really has more to do with like lane widths. How wide do the lanes need to be? What's the design speed of the curves through there? And while we're still working through the details, so far we seem to be on the right track of being able to accomplish the city's goals in those areas. The other thing I just wanted to talk about was pedestrian connectivity. So with the roundabout, we are showing pedestrian connectivity around the north side. We aren't showing anything along the south side, and that again speaks to the fact that we're anticipating that some redevelopment would occur. But I don't know many people who would bike on Highway 5 between Waconia and Victoria, but should they decide to do that, the layout today would provide them an opportunity to cross to the north side. And then the plans do provide for a trail connection up to the Steiger Lake Lane roundabout, which would tie into the trail that we just talked about on the 11 project. And then also continue along Highway 5, working as we work through the design to provide connectivity to the Hennepin County Regional Trail under the bridge behind the All Power Sports Building. So, that really would create a pretty good loop and opportunity for that connectivity through there. So we're excited to see that in the plan. The other thing that we'll need to talk about, and this really relates to all of the roundabouts that you're going to see between the 3 I showed you tonight and the three more on the next two projects, 3.5, if we count the mini. The city will have a role in determining aesthetics associated with the roundabouts, and also on Rolling Acres Road, the planned medians that are proposed around there. So needing to start to take a look at, if you're driving around, paying attention to what you're seeing for landscaping within the roundabouts that you pass through around the county. What goes in those roundabouts becomes a city decision, because that plant material and all of that is city maintained. So needing to find that balance of what level of aesthetic we want to have in those spaces while balancing maintenance of those areas is something that we'll start to work through as these designs get a little bit further along the process. Along those same lines, as we start to look at the pedestrian corridors along 11 and along 5, we envision along 11 that we would anticipate that to be a bituminous trail, similar to what we would be building on 11 north of here. But as we look along Highway 5 and you start to think about, like the Roars project, for example, a building close to the right-of-way of 5, do we want that trail to be a trail? Do we want it to be a sidewalk? Do we want to look at adding our streetlights, like our downtown streetscape features, our banner poles, any of those streetscape defining community elements? Wayfinding would be another piece of that. That's something that, as this thing gets further in the process, that the city will need to make decisions about whether we want to add those elements. That would be a city cost. So certainly, cost, maintenance, balance, those questions. And we're certainly not prepared to talk about that tonight, but I wanted to get the council thinking about it, because with all of these projects, we're going to get to the point where we'll have to be talking about that. And I've found myself personally that it's been helpful to pay attention to those things as we're driving around. The county's done a lot of county improvements, whether you, go south to Carver. Highway 11 in Carver has some of the elements that we would be talking about built into it. Whatever the road is that goes into Chaska, 140, the double roundabouts by 212. There's Chaska's included some elements, and Waconia has some too. What?
Woods Drive.
Yeah, that one. I don't know the names once I leave Victoria city limit. So those are some of the pieces that the city will need to start thinking about. I'm going to come back to this, but just wanted to provide an update on a couple of other elements. This is a very, very exciting slide to show. So the improvements that we've been talking about are about a $9 million project, and up until 2 weeks ago, we were still discussing, if we don't get funding, how are we going to scale this thing back? So we have a lot of different funding sources coming together. So Met Council regional solicitation, that was really that catalyst to be able to start to budget for a roundabout here. We applied for some MnDOT funds for a local priority project, so that brings another $1 million to the table. MnDOT is proposing to contribute some funds just associated with the pavement that needs to be replaced. I'm going to come back to the county and the city. We did just learn, which I believe Dana shared with everyone, that we did get $3.2 million in transportation and economic development funds, and that's combined with transportation economic development infrastructure funds that we got that can be used for the County Road 11 share in support of the improvements on 5. These are pretty significant wins that we were really excited about. A lot of work went into those applications from the county, and the community development department had to do a lot, as well as our business owners, in helping us prepare those applications. We do have one more application out for local road improvement funds for $1.5 million. So you see an asterisk by the Carver County and City of Victoria cost share numbers, because they're placeholders right now. We really need an updated estimate now that we think we can fund the full project, and then really figure out what the local share is for those costs It's going to change with these recent awards, and if we get local road improvement funds, that would change that even further. So we have a placeholder plugged into the CIP. We're planning to use state aid funds for our share, but we got to work through that as we get an updated estimate. Because this is a city-led project, the city is going to need to authorize another round of design funds as we continue to move past the layout into detailed design. So you'll see that, I would anticipate, on the first meeting in February, if the city and county have that squared away. The county is cost sharing in that design work, so we've got to work through the next round of budget that we need for that step. So again, in terms of where we are in process, we'll be having another open house coming up here in the spring towards construction in 25. And with that, I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Perfect. Thank you. Lots of good work being done. Thank you to Mr. Johnson sitting here in the audience as well. Do you have anything to add? Made the trip over. If you have anything brilliant what you want to say, come on up to the podium and say it.
I don't think I do. I think Kara covered this all very well.
All right, very good. Thanks. Council, any other questions on this? All right.
The only thing to add then too, if you, as you noodle this and think about it, if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out. The city council will need to approve the layout, so if you start to have concerns about what you're seeing here, reach out to Dana and she'll get you in contact with me to talk through those concerns, but certainly we'd want to know that not once the plans are all completed and in front of you for approval.
Very good. Fair. Thanks. All right. Moving on. Thank you so much, Kara. Sure. Next item on our agenda, item 2.2, which is a sketch plat for a residential development comprised of affordable apartment building and townhome units called Victoria South. Presenting this evening is our city planner, Brian McCann. Mr. McCann, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a moment here while I get the presentation pulled up. Thank you for your patience. Yes, tonight we do have a sketch plat presenting from Victoria South, which comes from Golden Valley Land Company. We do have Civil Site Group and Real Estate Equities in the audience tonight as well, who are representing the application. So the Victoria South residential development, this application was submitted in sketch plat form, so that means that we are just looking for initial feedback from the City Council this evening. There won't be any approvals or actions being taken. It's just to provide guidance to them when they are preparing future submittals for preliminary plat. So a quick overview of the location and area. It's just over 24 acres large, adjacent to Victoria Drive Highway 11. It's currently within Laketown Township. So when they do move forward, it will require an annexation. This parcel is located south of the railroad and the Marsh Hollow development, and they are proposing two uses. The first one being a 144-unit apartment building with internal and exterior parking. And then we are showing two options this evening that have been brought forward to staff. One of the options having 126 townhomes and the other one having 134. So the existing conditions of the site, it's mostly farmland and associated structures like barns and dwellings. There is a gravel driveway, and Chaska Creek is located in the northwest corner, which you can see here. There's also a small amount of wooded areas on the north side of the site, and there are wetlands as well, mostly to the west and along that north line adjacent to the Chaska Creek. So the comprehensive plan has guided this area for high-density residential and open space. This guidance includes townhome products, row houses, patio homes, apartments, condos, and senior living, with a density range between 12 and 36 units per acre, and it also allows building heights between 3 to 5 stories. And then additionally, the parcels to the south are guided for flex employment and commercial uses. Just to get a better understanding of how this site is going to function, as well as the future developments to the south, the applicant has provided a ghost plat that we will review with you for consideration for the future road network. So here's the ghost plat that was provided. I really want to focus on the road network here and not so much the uses that are shown. Those are just conceptual at this point and are not any proposed developments. But the road network is showing from the Victoria South site a collector road coming down, which would allow access throughout the rest of the area at multiple points with 2 connections onto Highway 10 Engler Boulevard and a full access onto Victoria Drive. For the zoning annexation and land use, as I mentioned, it's currently within Laketown Township. When a property is annexed into the city, it automatically has an agricultural zoning classification. So the applicant tonight would be seeking a PUD with underlying R4 zoning. Now, I just want to point out that rezonings are discretionary, meaning if you aren't supportive of the product being brought forward, you don't have to rezone a property. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the residential uses are permitted for the townhomes and the apartment building that are being brought forward, and units in the northeast corner near the West Chaska Creek would be subject to the standards of the Shoreland Overlay District. So here we have the first concept that was presented to staff. You'll notice that the collector road is the same. The apartment building is located on the southeast corner, and then they are proposing a mini roundabout, which we're calling Street A. This would be a public roundabout, which would separate off into private drives to access the townhomes. Excuse me. And then also a Street C, which would also be a cul-de-sac extending to the west, which would access the remaining townhomes. They're also proposing a clubhouse with a pool, as well as other amenities such as a playground and common area, a dog run, a tot lot for the apartment building, and then a various trail network going throughout the development. And touching on that trail network here, you'll see a regional trail connection being proposed along Victoria Drive, and then neighborhood trail connections throughout the development in yellow, including a potential pedestrian crossing over the railroad, and then various city sidewalk connections on both sides of the street for all the city roads that I mentioned, the collector, the mini roundabout, and the cul-de-sac. Then just touching on some of the amenities provided, they have the dog park and tot lot for the apartment building, and then the clubhouse with the playground and a fireplace, as well as a few pedestrian overlooks for some of the scenic areas adjacent to the ponding. Moving on to option B, you'll see that this one has less private drives. There's only one private drive shown on the north side of the site. The remaining area, they are proposing a 40-foot wide public loop that would go around the site, and the townhomes would be accessing the public drive there. They've kept a lot of the amenities the same and just relocated them, so you'll see the community building and the pool are located here, but they still have the pedestrian overlooks, and a dog park to the west, and then the apartment building remains in the same location and retains the same amenities. And then this is how this would operate with various pedestrian connections. So with this proposal, they are only showing the sidewalk on one side of the street. Typically, we require sidewalks on both sides of the street, but with the reduction of right-of-way, the applicant will be requesting sidewalks on only one side. But they also still have the neighborhood trail connections through a large open green space that they've proposed central to the site, and retaining the regional trail connection as well. And as I mentioned, the amenities proposed are distributed differently than option A, but generally remain the same. So here we have some architectural renderings for the planned clubhouse with patio seating, a pool, and a fitness room. Just a side note, we do have some optimism that hopefully this could potentially be a future polling area for elections for us. And here's some architectural drawings of the townhomes. Each will have a 2-stall garage connected with them, and they're also proposing modern designs in neutral colors. So here are some examples of what the apartment building could potentially look like. These are some projects from Real Estate Equity in various areas throughout the Twin Cities, such as Eagan, West St. Paul, Matamidi, and Maplewood. And then here are the interiors of those products. You can see that a lot of them have modern finishes on the inside as well. So comparing the two options that staff have reviewed and are bringing forward to you tonight, they both retain the 144-unit apartment building with the affordability component. As I mentioned, option A has 126 townhomes, option B has 134. The differences in the road networks being that option A has private drives connecting to the mini roundabout and the cul-de-sac. Staff, when we initially did this review, we thought it looked and felt a lot like the Whispering Hills development in town. And then option B, this has increased amenities with the open space that I mentioned, which staff are anticipating would be HOA maintained. And then the 40-foot public right-of-way loop with the driveway accesses and the sidewalk on one side. And there is some potential snow maintenance agreement with private consulting that the applicant has mentioned if this option is the alternative that council would prefer. So looking at the parking, our requirements for apartments are 2 spaces per dwelling, one of which has to be enclosed. So based on their proposal, they're lacking 15 spaces. Not a huge amount, but that would require some sort of PUD deviation for those missing spaces. And then for the townhomes, they have stated and shown through the architectural renderings that each one will have 2 stalls, so they'll meet the parking requirement for that. And then additionally, they're proposing between 39 or 48 guest spaces, depending on which layout you're looking at. And then just some landscaping and tree preservation requirements. So we would require boulevard trees every 35 to 45 feet adjacent to the right-of-way. And then foundation plantings are required around townhomes and apartment buildings based on zoning code, and 40-foot buffer adjacent to Highway 11. Now, if we want to consider any additional buffers with the railroad or maybe the commercial flex employment area to the south, that's something we should also discuss this evening. And then regarding open space, it's a minimum 25% for the entire development, and additionally a tree and shrub planted for every 1,000 feet of open space. So, and as I mentioned, there's a little bit of trees on the north side of the site, so we'll evaluate tree preservation when they move on to preliminary plat. As I mentioned, there's a small area within the Shoreland Overlay District. I've highlighted the line in yellow so you can see exactly where and how many units that affects. That area will be required to have a 50% minimum open space and a 25% maximum impervious surfacing. In our preliminary discussions with the applicant, it seems like they're going to meet those standards. They just have to show those at a future phase. And then if they will be required to have a shoreline PUD because they are proposing more than duplexes. Anything over a duplex in the Shoreland Overlay District requires a shoreline PUD, which evaluates the density with a tier analysis. So that will be evaluated at preliminary plat. And if the density is higher than what's allowed, they'll have to get a variance for that. Moving on to parkland dedication. So the future parkland that they've shown on both of those, I didn't really touch on. They won't count, that area won't count towards parkland dedication because it is not on the site being proposed this evening. It's on the parcel to the south. But this area does have a future neighborhood park search area in our 2040 comprehensive plan, which you'll see on the right of the screen here. I've highlighted the parcel in blue, and you can see this shaded area does identify a majority of this parcel as being a potential future neighborhood park search area. If they were going to do a land dedication for either option A or B, it would be between 6.25 and 6.5 acres, or if they were going to do all cash, it would be about $655,000 to $677,000. The Parks and Recreation Committee did review this at their meeting on January 17th. Their comments included the trail standards, the size of the presented amenities, how much open space, what are the potential sizes of the playgrounds, dog parks, clubhouses. They were focused on wanting figures, acreages to know how much parkland and what types of amenities were being provided, as well as the potential for the proposed railroad crossing for the pedestrian connection to the Marsh Hollow development to the north, as well as maintenance and ownership of the various amenities, and stormwater ponds and questions about safety, always concerns about children playing around stormwater ponds and potential dangers there. And then also the distance to the nearest neighborhood parks, which would be the Hunters Brook and Marsh Hollow developments to the north. And then regarding the access and connectivity, as I mentioned, they're proposing that Collector Street, which would come from Victoria Drive and go to the south and access those future flex and commercial areas with internal circulation. And then, as I touched on earlier, option B reduces that sidewalk to one side of the street for the public roads. So specifically, this public loop that you see here would only have one sidewalk. With that, I will pass it over to Kara.
Great, thanks. You've covered all of this in great detail about the difference between B and option A and option B. What I'm going to want to touch on a little bit further is just the right-of-way question. I do want to note that the access to County Road 11 that they're showing is consistent with the corridor study that was adopted. So the county adopted a corridor study from 11, for 11, the city provided a resolution of support for that corridor study. So the developer has that information and is aware of it. And we're starting to work through what that might look like if a development were to move forward. 11 needs to be rebuilt south of the railroad tracks, the same way as it was built north of the railroad tracks. We did not talk about it on our list of upcoming transportation improvements because it's not in design yet, but the county does have funding for improvements at 10 and 11. That design will get kicked off underway so we can have more construction in the same corridor on some other new timeline. So the developer is aware of that, and we're working together as we work through those things. But what I specifically wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about is the 40-foot right-of-way. So the developer provided the graphic shown here to staff as we started to discuss how the pieces come together. So there's two different elements around right-of-way needs and what we need in the public right-of-way. Things that you can see above ground, and then things that we build underground that cause us to need right-of-way. This next slide here, and I'm going to get to a third slide where I talk about this in more detail because I don't expect you to stare at these and understand all the differences between them. But so the project is proposing a 40-foot right-of-way. Our standard right-of-way for any public street is 60 feet. And what we're trying to fit within vertically, the part visually that you can see, what we're trying to accomplish within that right-of-way is being able to fit all the things that the city has identified as important to include in the public right-of-way. So in the case of Victoria, that in a single-family development, we always have sidewalk on one side of the road. In multifamily developments, we'll often see that the city has asked for both sidewalks on both sides of the road. Addition to that, boulevard trees have proven to be a very important element to the community, so we work to fit those within the right-of-way. We also have to fit fire hydrants and signs and light posts and things of that nature. So when we start to look at what the differences are between what we typically see on a standard street, what's being proposed here would be to reduce the right-of-way that's provided by 20 feet. So we can't fit the exact same infrastructure that we put in a public road in a 60-foot wide road in a 40-foot wide right-of-way. So some of the deviations that you're seeing here in order to make things fit is instead of a 28-foot wide street, which is what's standard for all of our residential streets and all of our public streets, except for in old neighborhoods that were reconstructed, our city standard is 28 feet wide. They're proposing 24 feet, so reducing that by 4 feet. And because of the density of the neighborhood, they're also proposing that those streets would be signed for no parking. As you're all aware, even with our 28 feet wide streets, our fire chief has some concerns in the winter if there's events and a lot of cars parked on the street and challenges of getting a fire truck through. So in this particular case, they're proposing 24 feet with no parking on either side. As has been presented by the city planner, they are also proposing to only have sidewalk on one side of the street to help reduce the amount of things that need to be constructed within that right-of-way. The other thing that you're seeing here is that they're proposing to move the boulevard trees up into the yards. So typically the boulevard trees, if I go back to this picture, typically in Victoria, we put our boulevard trees about 5 feet behind the back of curbs. So if you drive down any of the newer neighborhoods, you'll see those trees there. Those don't fit in the 40-foot right-of-way because of other underground infrastructure that becomes concerning. So if they were to put the tree right behind the curb in, typically as we would with this smaller right-of-way, the distance between the back of curb and the sidewalk is really narrow. So you'd start to see the sidewalks heaving from tree roots. And then we have a drain tile system that's located underneath the road that the tree roots like to find that. So we like to not get those tree roots too close to the drain tile system because it creates maintenance problems for everybody who's tied into it. So to mitigate that, the developer is proposing that the trees would be located in the front yard. With the dimensions that are available, that puts them about 10.5 feet from the front of the house. So up in their front yard. The other thing that Public Works noted with this reduced layout is just, and part of it has to do with just also the density. When you have this many driveways, where does the snow go? So we've been continuing conversations with the developer about where does the snow get stored? How does it get removed from the site? And they've been working on coming up with a snow storage plan for areas that the snow could be pushed to and hauled out of later. And then the other two things I wanted to touch on are reduced corridor for utilities. So while we hope to not have to excavate the sanitary sewer system, the storm sewer system, or the water system anytime soon, within the 60-foot right-of-way, if we had to go in and replace the sanitary sewer in 50 years, we could do so within the right-of-way without necessarily having to affect private property owners. We probably would affect the boulevard trees depending on how deep that pipe was down the road. That's why you'll always see controversial situations in cities where roads get rebuilt and they have to take out all the boulevard trees when they have to replace the 75-year-old water main. It doesn't go over very well. So my end of the table is always discouraging boulevard trees at all, but that's not what the community wants. And then the other change is just this space outside of the right-of-way. The city, in the city's typical section, we require a 10-foot utility easement outside of the right-of-way, and that's for gas, electric, telephone, all those private utility folks, so they aren't also located within our area that we need for future work on streets. So another modification made was to reduce that to 7 feet. And then lastly, the only other comment that I would make would be the distance from the front yard to the back of sidewalk on this side of the street ends up being about 18 feet from the front of the house to the sidewalk. So just wondering if there's concerns with if you have a big vehicle encroaching over to the sidewalk. I don't have that big of a vehicle, but somebody might. And with that, I think that those are my comments on the right-of-way. The other elements are all pretty standard. The developer and the developer's engineer have done a lot of work within the community. Their preliminary work reflects that with stormwater features and wetland buffers being on outlots that would need to be deeded to the city. Site utilities, sewer and water will be extended from Marsh Hollow, so it's amazing to be saying we're finally at the point where we're going to have utilities on the south side of the railroad tracks. There's been a lot of conversations about the South Growth area today where I've been like, hey, we've been talking about this since 2002. Here we are. So that's all planned. We do need to extend trunk utilities through the site to serve the additional areas. The only other element is that just reminding the council that well number 6 needs to be completed before we could actually connect homes in this area to the water system. The developer is well aware of that timing and understands that we need to coordinate as we work through things. Now I'll stop talking.
Thanks. And then along with our Parks and Rec Committee, our Planning Commission did review it on January 2nd. We didn't have any members of the public in attendance, so we didn't receive any comments. The Planning Commission did state, though, that they had a preference for option B, and they noted that is a large number of residents coming through the one access point, so I think the applicant might touch on it later about some potential temporary exits south of the site. They also noted about the significant reduction in the right-of-way for option B that Kara just spoke about. Also, the feasibility of the pedestrian crossing, that seems to be a hot topic with our committees and commissions. And then also asking about the guest parking for townhomes and no street parking, so that's why I provide the guest number stalls for you this evening. And then also touching on amenities such as the 2-stall garages for townhomes, the bedrooms per units, asking about potential EV charging stations within the apartment unit, parking, and potential storage lockers as well for the apartment building. They also had questions regarding the shoreland overlay and the impervious requirements in the wetlands, and then the Chaska Creek and proposed ponds that they're showing. And as I mentioned, the buffer requirements also came up, and buffering responsibilities for the potential commercial areas to the south and the railroad to the north. And then also asking the applicant about the timing and phasing, how many phases and when they're going to start and where they're going to start first with all the products that they're showing. And then just a summary for all your consideration tonight, showing what they're asking for as part of their PUD proposal, reduction of the sidewalks to one side of the street, reducing the right-of-way for option B, the landscaping buffers, and then also just to note what they're proposing is between about 12.5 to 13.5 units per acre. Our density range does allow 12 to 36 units per acre for this entire parcel. And then also that's within a future park search area, but there isn't a neighborhood park identified on either of the options shown, and the reduction in the enclosed parking for the apartment building. So for that, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there's no action required this evening, but staff do encourage discussion based on the options shown on the screen, and staff and the applicant can stand for any questions you might have.
Awesome, thank you very much. Council, this is interesting, big project. To Kara's point, this gets us into that South Growth area that we've been talking about for a couple of decades. So, council, who wants to start?
I can go.
Councilmember Roberts, please kick us off.
So I know. So first of all, I believe the apartment is going to be affordable housing, correct? So I'm very happy to see that. We've been talking about more affordable housing in Victoria for a while, so very excited that that's part of this. So looking at the two options, I'm more drawn to option 2. I know there are a lot of design concerns about that one, but from an aesthetic space, I think it looks better, the big green space. And I guess I would just, for people who are concerned about the smaller roads and the one sidewalk, I would just, so my neighborhood and its adjacent neighborhood are really good examples of this. So I live in the Woodlands, and we only have a sidewalk on one side of the street, and it is not a problem at all. I mean, it's used all the time. People still walk on the street if they don't want to walk on the sidewalk. I don't see a sidewalk on one side in this development as an issue. And to the road with garden path is, I think, a really good example of what this kind of would be. Garden path is right next. And so I encourage, if people haven't been through there, is to drive through there. So again, smaller road, they have no on-street parking. They have like little, I would call them pods, right? In certain areas where they have where it's kind of inlaid, where you can park for, near different areas. But that is a very popular neighborhood. I mean, houses go up and they're gone immediately. And I think we need more housing like we're seeing in these, with these townhomes, because, whether it's, and I believe these are going to be rentals, correct? Where the one in Garden Path are not, but you got younger families who want to rent versus buy. It's a little bit smaller, so you're not getting that big house, so you're not paying as much. But also in this Garden Path neighborhood, it's a lot of seniors, right, who want to move from their big house that they had a family in, but aren't ready yet for that apartment or senior living type thing. And you get that kind of house feel, but yes, you do have that, one shared wall. So I think, I know Kara had all the different downsides of option B, but seeing how it works in Garden Path, a very similar, a little smaller, but how it works there, I definitely like option B better.
Good.
Mayor? Yeah, so I do want to highlight the difference with Garden Path is those are private streets. So that's a distinct difference, and it's a conversation that staff and the developer have talked about too, is it becomes different when it's privately maintained. You aren't having to get our snowplow equipment. We aren't the ones having to maintain that infrastructure. So that's the reason why that footprint is as narrow as it is. So they're private streets.
But we could do that here.
Certainly, the council
as long
could
as they're willing
decide.
to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, I would
yes.
agree that that works because they take care of plowing the streets and the driveways. That would have to happen with option B.
Yeah, and we're responsible for the sewer and water that
Yep.
would be buried within those roads, but they're responsible for everything else
Yep.
within their neighborhood, which includes future reconstruction, mill and overlay, seal coat, reconstruction of the streets because they're private.
Do we have any neighborhood examples of something that's kind of quasi-private and with around street reconstruction, or is it one or the other?
It's one or the other. Okay. And the Savannah Valley neighborhood, those streets used to be private. So that was an example of a PUD that the city approved that had some of these elements incorporated into it. So that one still has boulevard trees. I think the streets are 28 feet wide, but the right-of-way is narrower, and it still has a lot of the elements in it. They approached the city a number of years ago, unhappy that they pay taxes and had this responsibility for maintaining these private streets. So the city council at the time opted to agree to take them over as public streets. And so now the Public Works Department is working through the challenges of maintaining the trees in that neighborhood, and the drain tile is all in rough shape due to those trees. The garden path folks are expressing concern similar of having to, they pay taxes, why do they have to pay to maintain the private streets? That one's a little bit different than Savannah Valley because it's the platted outlot that the streets are in is only 24 feet wide. So there, I don't know how the city could consider, you wouldn't have land rights to really do the work that you would need to do if you took those back. So that's not something that's come forward to the council today, but those are some of the challenges. What the developer has talked about is, would there be an option to have essentially a maintenance agreement with the HOA where they would at least do the snow removal piece of the public streets to the point that they would have different equipment. It would be very difficult in this situation for our big plow trucks to do that. So that's one idea that the developer proposed to work through that, and that would be something that would be discussed, you know, as they decide if they're moving forward.
Understood.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
couple? The driveways for these, so right, because everything's narrow, right? So is there, I'm assuming cars can be parked, like is the driveway long enough where a car can be parked in the driveway? It's not like super short.
There'd be 18 feet from the face of the house to the,
So even with on the side that has the sidewalk would have plenty of room, okay.
yeah, for one car.
Sure, yeah, yep,
You know,
Sure,
they
yeah.
couldn't double park.
yep. I'm just thinking from guests, like if you're parked in your thing and you have like,
But they have accommodated some parking spaces for guests.
yeah.
Yep.
And then, how big is in option B, the green space, right? Like, I mean, it looks great, right? It's open space but I guess it's hard to tell when you're looking at a picture, right? How big that green space is.
Sure, Councilmember Roberts, that was one of the questions that the Parks and Rec Committee had. We didn't get a number then. I'm guessing we don't have a figure now for acreage regarding that open space.
Hi, welcome. Tell us who you are, please.
My land company, also the civil engineer, civil site crew. I don't have an acreage on that park. I should have had that for tonight, but it's basically at one end of it, kind of the narrow end, it's about 50 feet wide. And at the other end, it's probably 250, 300 feet wide. It's like a football field. That gives you kind of a visual of the width of it. So,
Okay. Good, thank you.
thank you.
Councilmember Roberts, anything else?
I already know.
Okay, thanks. Council, other questions, other comments?
Just had a couple questions.
Councilmember Ivansky, please.
On the townhouses, are those rental or are those going to be ownership model?
Councilmember Ivansky, I believe those will be rentals.
Mr. Pavic.
Yes, I'll just stay up here. Yes, right now the planning is to be rental townhomes, but we would probably plat them as though they could be for sale also. So.
So your current study says rent them, but with the option to change your mind on it?
Correct.
Okay,
And we're designing it in such a way that you could go either way.
okay, very good, thank you. Councilmember Ivansky? any
Yeah,
other-
well, I mean, I do share the Public Works, I share the fire department's concern about the street width, I share our engineering's concerns about the utilities and the difficulties of having it be a city-owned road. I'm leaning towards it having be a private road, and then given that it's rental, the taxpayer, air quotes around it, is the overall project, and then can assume those duties of snow removal, the street maintenance, and the city's responsibility is really only for water and sewer. And then as that becomes aged and replaced, then it's the, air quotes around it again, owner's responsibility to take care of the landscaping and reconstruct the trees, can deviate from having sidewalks and city standards. So my head is in that frame of reference in terms of making this work, as opposed to having the city take on those responsibilities. And just sort of some anecdotal evidence on the nature of private streets in a subdivision moving into the public. As Kara points out, I'm living proof of that because I'm a Savannah Valley resident. I can tell you that the narrow boulevard is a problem with snow buildup. Some residents just choose not to shovel their walks because they have no place to put the snow. There are other curved streets that are in the neighborhood where it becomes very tight and problematic for emergency vehicles to come through, especially as snow builds up and people don't move their vehicles off the streets and onto driveways. It just becomes a compounding problem. So I would be hesitant to have the city assume those kind of difficulties when a private solution exists that could take care of it, not meeting our city standards.
Good point.
That's
All right.
Would you mind if I quickly just touched on that
Yeah, please,
question?
Mr. Havoc.
Thank you. I think we have had a lot of discussions collaborating with staff on this question because we know it's a question. Mostly I think the biggest one is snow removal. And that's one, again, that we agree with city staff that should be and probably is best to be done privately because of what we're proposing here. Because we have narrow boulevards, we've got a lot of driveways, narrow streets. There's going to need to be, smaller equipment that's done there. And then the HOA can just move all of that where it needs to be moved at once rather than having many different plow companies and then working with the city and then who's in first and all those kinds of things. So that's the snow question. And also HOA would be then maintaining the sidewalks too. So they're going to be, plowing the sidewalk and the trail or whatever is needed there. So we're definitely open and kind of encouraging that idea that we could have a public-private partnership on that. I think what we were trying to do here with the narrow public right-of-way is kind of go outside the box here a little bit and try to have a private street look and feel, and performance, but then have a public benefit that it is a publicly owned infrastructure so that the residents that live there or the owner of the entire complex would then get the benefit of having a public street that they can pay taxes into and never have that question come up again of who owns this. And we think the street itself, the curb and gutter and the pavement, can easily be maintained in that 40 feet. I think it's the infrastructure, the sewer depths that are the question. And we're working through that with staff again on how do we get those things maintained. But we think what we've presented is pretty reasonable in terms of trying to accomplish, again, that private street feel with the public street benefit and come up with a new kind of concept. So,
And I think I can buy into that if we have a townhouse ownership model. I'm a bit on the reticent side when it's all rental, it's owned by one large owner. You want to deviate from our public standards. The public benefit doesn't really accrue to the public. It accrues to the large owner of the property. So I'm still kind of leaning towards a private ownership of the road unless we can get ourselves to the standards that the city needs to get there. I also have concerns about the amount of entrance for emergency vehicles with that many residents living in there and only really effectively one way to get our emergency equipment in and out. Anybody who's done a ride along with our fire trucks has seen firsthand in some of the neighborhoods what they have to go through to get emergency vehicles in very tight, snug places. And while it's fine when everybody sees the kids coming and saying, "Hey, firemen," but when there's an emergency, we have a public responsibility to be able to get that equipment in there and save lives as quickly as we can. So I think that you've heard it from the Planning Commission that that's a concern, and we would look to have a solution for that. And then the last topic I'm going to raise is the railroad noise. We've had presentations before Planning Commission in the past about what it would take to have that railroad crossing become a whistle-less stop. I think that we're getting to that point if we're going to bring this development there. With the density that's there, that option starts to be explored, and the developer has to cover that, and perhaps you can maybe reach a development agreement with some of the other developments that benefit around it. But I don't see that as we're increasing the density that deep, that it's on the city's time to pay for that.
Okay. On that topic, real quick, as a part of the County Road 11 improvements south of the railroad track, a big piece of the whistle-less stop is getting medians in there and getting that street in there, right? So I think that that's a great point to bring up, that we can talk with city staff and try to make sure that when that gets designed to the south, if the improvements need to be made then to convert that to a whistle-less stop, that'd be in everybody's interest with hopefully a nominal change in cost from what's already there. So that's something that for sure is on our radar, and we'll be open to talking to staff about that. And then the other crossing, we were talking about the pedestrian crossing. Did you bring that up too, or not?
I didn't. I mean, I think that you can recognize the difficulty of having to try to make that kind of an infrastructure arrangement here, and we may just have to perhaps understand that there are certain things about certain projects that are non-starters. This might be one of them. I think that also kind of brings upon a safety issue of, how do we effectively manage just a pedestrian only crossing in what was a farm crossing, where right now who owns that is taking the risk, but with the density that we're talking about and the number of human lives that are going to traffic across that, and then it just sort of brings it back to, there's really very little in the way of park facility. Park money exchange for dedication is a different animal than human behavior. I think that we want to probably consider safety aspects and maybe have to come to grips with the fact that the crossing that is sitting there today is probably not something that's going to be attainable.
Did you have some comments, Mr. Pavic, on the pedestrian crossing?
Yeah, the main comment is that it's just an idea. So we understand the challenges of that. We've kind of started to look into it. There's permitting through MnDOT, through the railroad. It's a very challenging thing to accomplish. We were showing it there because we thought there was maybe potential. We're totally open to the idea of it not being there or being there. We know that the safest way is to take the regional trail across at the main road. That's the way to really get north. We're trying to create some potential inter-neighborhood connectivity with that connection. And if it is deemed to be too dangerous by the city, then we're not going to argue that point, because we agree, that it could be. There are many other instances where there are crossings, so may be not that challenging, but we just don't know which way that's going to go. So. Yeah. We just wanted to present it as
I think it's worth exploring. Worth exploring for sure. Very good. Anything else, Councilmember Evansky?
Thank you, Mayor. That's it for me.
All right.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gunderson, anything from you?
Yeah, I would echo what Chad said about the attempt at lower income housing or opportunities there, but also echo a lot of what Councilman Evansky said. It's a far cry from what we envisioned only a few years ago. And I have to be honest, I saw it on the Planning Commission docket and probably still am in shock for what had been planned a few years ago from what we had, and not sure if they had shown you what we had planned and what we'd worked on versus what is there. And then even the ghost plat really kind of sent things off spiraling to the point of lower, more affordable housing to boutique grocery store, kind of contradiction of who you're having live there versus how much they're paying on groceries. When you use terms like boutique, I hear higher pricing. So for me, to get over some of the things where it's the cost benefit to what's the cost benefit to the city, what are we maintaining? We're already getting calls for a whistle-less stop or a silent crossing, and so that's something that has to be on the table. That's not, I don't think, from our end, with already getting those, that has to be on the table. It's not an option, I don't think. it's a good attempt. Maybe there are other things. I don't know what else was explored. My hope, I don't know how the general public is going to utilize that parkland without any parking, how they're going to get there if it's a publicly accessed site. It's in the back corner of already narrow streets, which we talked about navigating. So, how do we make that more accessible, and things like that. I kept looking at the Ghost Plat, and all I could think of was Chaska Commons West, and that's what I saw, and that's not what we visioned, and that's not what we'd like to see, I guess.
Can I?
Yeah. Oh, Ms. Hardy, please.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I just want to point out, and I'm sure the team can jump in here, but the purposes of the Ghost Plat was to demonstrate potential connectivity between the residential and the future commercial. It was not like they don't own that property, so the intent was not to say this is what's going in that future area. It was just to show the potential road and pedestrian connections that could happen between that residential and that commercial space. So we didn't, outside of having a very general conversation with the team that's here today about what future potential commercial uses there could be based on conversations we've been having for the last couple years, we didn't get into any details on that.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate that a little bit. The Ghost Plat has nothing to do with our project. It was, we had just, again, prepared it to show a road connection. We didn't mean to even label things grocery store. It's really just showing typical size commercial buildings that kind of could fit around this road network. So I apologize if that looks like part of our project, because it's not.
Councilmember Gunderson, anything else? All right, I have just a couple of comments for you outside of my colleagues here. I prefer the townhomes and apartment building versus two apartment building. I like the townhome. I like the product you're bringing forward. Green space is a big deal to us here in Victoria. I like that green space. I think anything that we can do to incorporate that and more of it, understanding that we've got some restraints around density and trying to get enough buildings in there per our comprehensive plan. I understand that's an issue. I also think that we have a great opportunity that we should not squander between that housing development and that commercial development. Those are customers, those are clients, those are important people. We want that to feel seamless when you go from the neighborhood to the commercial development. It all has to work together. I'm not as concerned. I don't mind the one-sided sidewalk. I agree with Councilmember Roberts. We have a lot of neighborhoods that have sidewalks on one side. That doesn't create any problems. Moving the trees off the boulevard doesn't create a lot of problems for me, as long as we still have some of those there. We can probably pick species that don't get so big and have all those concerns with the undergrounding. Making sure that we take every precaution to ensure the safety of those residents, I think is also really important. Anything that we can do to make sure those emergency vehicles can get in there, via however many, that's a lot of people with one entrance. So anything we can do to figure that out. I mean, we've got some really talented people on staff, and as you guys probably do too within your organization, that can help us figure that out. Looking through my notes here very quickly, I think that's all the comments that I have for you.
I had a couple
Yeah,
additional.
Councilmember Roberts, please.
My understanding is so with option B, that you would have to do berming, correct? Because on the south side, towards the commercial, and is there some? So my understanding is that you, with the way you're laid out in option B currently, that you don't have the space to do berming on the property, and that there's a little bit of the other property owners don't want to have to do it, right? And
Sure.
is that going to be an issue with option be?
So we have 25-foot setback on that side, and we met with the owner to the south. We were originally showing the berm kind of on their side. We read the city code as saying the higher use puts the berm in, which still may be the case, but we're willing to work with them and maybe, put part of it on our side, part of it on their side, or whatever. We've worked with them before. Tradition Development is the owner. And we worked right next to them on our Marsh Hollow project. So we're willing to work with them and figure out what fits, so we can have the best of both worlds there.
Yeah.
With
And
that.
in the spirit of cooperation, again, that connection it's got to look like it's not one thing and another thing. It's got to look like one thing. Does that make sense? I know those are very technical
It does.
descriptions.
And then I just wanted to ask Ms. Hardy, I believe they had a meeting today that might shed a little bit of at least that there's talks going with the railroad stuff. So
Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Hardy, please.
Mayor, Councilmember Roberts, members of the council, yes, staff have met with representatives of the railroad. It was a really positive conversation, and really, I'll just say, an opportunity to open the door and share what our vision is for our South Growth area, the types of conversations that are happening currently, and what we anticipate is going to happen, and what our needs are. So we had the conversation covered everything from we've got this rail, it's going to be here forever, and so is there an opportunity to work together to find that win-win in the future? The rail has some needs. We've got some industrial we have property in that South Growth area that's guided for that medium and light industrial. So is there an opportunity to collaborate on what those needs are, work with site selectors, and really get to that win-win without adding a whole bunch of more train traffic? And we learned some stuff through that process that they don't necessarily add more routes, they just add more cars. So there's a lot more conversations to occur in the future. The other thing that we talked about, that as we get more information and learn what our needs are, as we start really thinking about the commercial opportunities in our South Growth area, bringing representatives from the rail in to have a workshop and really talk through what does that vision, that shared vision, what are our shared goals, and how can we achieve that. So they're very much open to having that conversation. We anticipate that would take place at some point in the next year, several months, sooner rather than later, I think would be ideal, as we're currently working through what our South Growth area looks like. And then I would say that that they are very much open to working with the city and the communities that that the rail serves and goes through. And so there is definitely an opportunity, as we heard conversation here tonight about the Whistleless Stop, to have those conversations. We're now building that relationship, and then to talk through what type of pedestrian connections could happen, or even connections and improvements could happen as we work through the road portions too. It's not saying that they're gonna build us something tomorrow, but there's certainly conversations happening, and we're feeling very positive about it. And I'll just look to Brian to see if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that covered it all. Thanks, Dana.
You know, I like where this is going. I think that's a really important relationship. It behooves us to understand their business model and how things work. You know, the railroad's a bit of a different animal, and you know, we do have one in our community, and we're starting to build houses and people moving in around it. So I think that relationship and that understanding of their business model is a good one for us to lean into.
Do the utilities, is that, you know, we just talked about how we're going to now be on the south side. Is that a much bigger headache with, I'm assuming, with getting the utilities on the other side of the...
Yeah, utility crossings are a challenge with railroads. This particular rail line is not as challenging as some of the other rail lines, but because Matt's the civil engineer on both sides of the tracks, that's his problem to work through.
Very good. Dina, did you have something else?
I was just gonna add that the conversations, again, were very positive, and they're very concerned. They recognize that having a railroad in your community is probably not ideal. So they've really been wonderful in the initial conversations that we've been having. We're looking forward to having more conversations.
Excellent. Thank you so much for reaching out to them and starting that conversation. For those of you who are joining us and looking for the city council meeting, we have another item on our agenda for the workshop this evening. So we're going to do that, and we're going to finish up the workshop, and then we'll be back with the council meeting. So stick with us, and we'll be back with you. All right, Mr. Pavic, anything else from you this evening?
I don't think so. Thank you for the feedback. We really appreciate it. We're going to go to work and come back with a preliminary.
All right, very good. Any final comments from council on this topic? All right, seeing none, Mr. McCann, do you have what you need from council to move forward?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Excellent. All right. Moving on, our last item on our workshop agenda this evening is item 2.3. This is a commercial development in downtown Victoria, which is adjacent to our current fire station for Hometown Bank. And presenting this evening, we are welcoming back Mr. McCann. Ryan, please help.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, tonight we do have a sketch plat request from Hometown Bank. It's being brought forward by Headwaters Development. We do have representatives of both organizations in the audience this evening. So similar to the last item that we just saw, this is a sketch plat, so it's just looking for initial feedback from the city council. No approvals or actions need to be taken on this request this evening. It's simply to provide guidance to the development team when they work on future submittals. And I added a footnote there that you may have noticed this is familiar because it was reviewed a little over 2 years ago. So the location and area, it's roughly 4-acre parcel adjacent to Highway 5 and the fire station, as you mentioned. Downtown Victoria is to the west, and then there are Minnehaha Creek Watershed District properties to the east, as well as some residential homes to the south and further east of that watershed site. So the proposed uses this evening include a 1.5-story combined coffee shop and bank, as well as a 2-story future phase for a possible office or medical commercial building. The existing conditions on the property, there's grasses and rolling hills. It's a currently vacant property. And then, as I mentioned, that watershed district site is to the east. You can see that entire area east is wetland, and a good chunk of the northern and western border of the property as well. In our comprehensive plan, this parcel is currently guided for low-density residential and right-of-way. The applicant would be looking for a comp plan amendment to re-guide this to downtown mixed use in our future land use plan. And the downtown mixed use does allow for smaller scale retail or office buildings, which is similar to what they are proposing tonight. Our downtown mixed use district is intended to improve on the comfortable and safe environment for pedestrians and cyclists with strong links to trail amenities. So just something to keep in mind as we look at this site about potential pedestrian connections. And then, as well as this site is currently not shown on our downtown mixed use map in our comprehensive plan, so we may require a comp plan amendment to update this map as well, just as part of the process. Additionally, with it being guided for low density, it's currently zoned low density, so this would require a rezoning to our central business district. They would be seeking a PUD with this as well, so the CBD would be the underlying zoning. And the CBD does allow drive-in establishments such as they're proposing with a conditional use permit, and the medical and dental and office buildings are permitted uses within our CBD. So here we have the proposal. On the left side of the screen is the proposal for both phases. Phase 1 being on the south end of the site for the 1.5-story coffee and bank building, and then the north side of the site for the future 2-story office or medical building. So we'll focus here on the south side of the site for the coffee and building. So they're proposing a right in, right out connection to Highway 5, which would come into the site. And they are also proposing 2 drive-throughs, which would loop around the site and then intersect and crisscross to accompany the coffee and bank uses, as well as sidewalks and spacious parking areas. And then the 2-story building that we're being told would be phase 2. They're proposing underground parking in the 2-story building. At this time, there has not been a user identified. I think when you first saw this, or the first time around, there was a user attached to that. I'm being told that there's not a user at this moment for this building, but as you can see as well, they're providing sufficient parking for this. And here are some architectural renderings that were provided to us by the applicant for the coffee and bank building. You can see that they have a lot of stone facade on the front, as well as some modern incorporations on the interior for the building. Looking at the conditional use permit that I mentioned, the drive-throughs are a conditional use in our CBD. Based on 3 criteria. The first one being that the drive aisles aren't located within 100 feet of any portion of a residential district. So with those residential properties to the south, those drive aisles are within 100 feet, so they don't meet this requirement for that. And then item number 2 being that the frontage has 150 feet on a public street. They meet that portion, but it also requires that they have not less than 2 places of access. They're only proposing 1 with the right in, right out onto Highway 5. And then the third one being that the parking areas have a landscaped front yard. This will be closer evaluated at the preliminary plat phase when they've provided us with the landscaping plan.
Can you tell me how far the driveways of the residential district, I mean, are they 90 or are they 20?
I believe it's about 75 feet from when I was doing my own measurements.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then can you also show a little bit about the circulation for those 2 drive-throughs?
Sure, yeah.
So how that would kind of work?
Yeah, so I'm not sure which drive-through will be for which use, but this is the entrance for one of the drive-throughs, and then here's the entrance for the other. You'll see they both come in and kind of hit an intersection here where they'll have to both come in. Maybe the applicant can touch on where the windows will be. I believe one will be on this edge and one will be on this edge, so they'll kind of have to cross through each other to access each different window depending on which drive-through they're going through. Is that correct? Okay.
Can you
Do
come
you
up
wanna
and
clarify?
talk that through for us, please, a little bit? I'm curious about how all that would work.
Thank you.
And please introduce yourself for us.
Yeah, I'm Mike Hochberg with Headwaters Development, or the applicant here. And specifically on the drive-through, the bank is on the southwest side drive-through right there on the edge of the building. So they'll do the banking transaction, and then as they exit wide, and it's striped that way. And then the coffee shop that comes in, they're on that larger loop with the coffee board and order board.
Okay.
So then they drive straight on that angled, which is your south side of the building right there.
Okay, and so where that cursor is right now, that's where the
That
window
would be the
is for
coffee,
that.
yep.
And then the window for the bank is further
It's
back.
just around the other, yep, right
Okay,
there.
understood.
And
Okay.
there'll be an overhang and all that stuff for the banking transaction.
So, yeah, okay, so it'll be very obvious for people that they aren't pulling up to the ATM expecting a cup of coffee to come out of it or something.
Hometown Bank does have a similar traffic pattern in their other buildings.
Okay.
So they are used to that kind of functionality with the same coffee user. So there's a lot of interaction already.
All right, and let me just add how beautiful that building is. Well, you're here.
Do you hear that?
Yeah, beautiful.
I'll jump back up if you need.
All right, very good.
Thanks.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Mr. McCann, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to evaluating the parking. So here I've listed the standards for each of the types of uses that they're looking at for banks and financial institutions. Based on the size of the building that they're proposing, they would need 24 spaces. What they've provided is 23 spaces, so deficient of one space, really not that much of a difference, but it is still noteworthy. Restaurants without liquor, that would fall under the coffee use, so they would be required 15 spaces. As part of their application, they specifically requested a PUD consideration for this standard because they would only be providing 8 spaces for the coffee use. And then moving on to the office and medical, they would be required 101 spaces, and they're proposing 103. So they're meeting those parking spaces. And then additionally, throughout the site, they're showing 26-foot wide drive aisles. We do require 27-foot drive aisles. Then the landscaping, every 35 feet for commercial districts for boulevard trees. That's also a standard for our CBD. Our CBD is typically exempt from a lot of our landscaping standards because of the amount of impervious surface and the pedestrian connections and walkability that we're looking for. So not as many landscaping standards as other projects you may see, but we do still require foundation plantings where practical to soften and enhance the pedestrian experience. And then they provide a few examples in code of how this could be done, such as boulevard trees, planter boxes, plaza spaces, or designated green spaces. And then, as I mentioned, our CBD is a little bit different, so there's no buffer or open space requirements. And not a lot of trees on this site, so I can't imagine we're going to be looking at a tree preservation plan when this comes forward. Then the Shoreland Overlay District. So this property is actually would be the only parcel within our central business district that would not be within our Shoreland Overlay District, which I just think is kind of funny to note. So they would not be subject to any requirements from the DNR. Then the Parks and Recreation Committee reviewed the parkland dedication at their meeting on December 18th. It would either be a land dedication of just under a quarter acres or a cash in lieu fee of about $22,000. And the Parks and Rec did recommend the cash fee in lieu of the land dedication. They also mentioned the pedestrian improvements that should accompany this product. As it's currently proposed, there aren't a whole lot of pedestrian connections being proposed, so they just mentioned that they would like to see some pedestrian connections noted with future submittals. And then, as I mentioned, onto Highway 5, they're initially looking at a right in, right out with a future construction of the roundabout at the intersection with commercial. And then with that, I think I'll pass it over to Kara.
Great, thanks, Mayor, members of the City Council. Continuation from our workshop earlier, you'll hear a lot more about the 5 project at our next workshop. But the delay from 2021 to today with the applicant coming forward again really had to do with the roundabout. So the council, I imagine, can recall the discussions that occurred in that avenue. So we had done some work, some study work, and the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan and the projects that are now moving forward include the incorporation of a roundabout at Commercial and 5. So that is now in the design phase as part of the big Highway 5 project and is part of the overall funding plan for 5. You'll hear more about this at the workshop, but the big job, which includes this roundabout, is about 74% funded. The city did apply specifically for a TED grant for this intersection. The county applied at 10 and 11. We applied at this one. We were not successful in getting the grant at this particular location, but that doesn't mean that the roundabout isn't moving forward. The whole financing plan for all the projects is one big financial puzzle. The county has a lot of other funding opportunities in the mix that you'll hear more about at the workshop. So we're continuing forward with the plan for the roundabout here. But if the bank looks to construct before the roundabout is ready for construction, they would need to provide a right-in, right-out only intersection. MnDOT wouldn't allow a full access intersection at this point in time. So the applicant's aware of that. Their engineer is also working with the design engineer for the 5 project to work through the right-of-way needs that we'll need for the roundabout and how their planned improvements would tie in. So that's happening. The roundabout itself, I don't have a layout to show you yet for that, but it does, like we talked about at 5 and 11, does include pedestrian connections. So the roundabout in this location would have pedestrian crossings around all 4 legs. And we're looking at a sidewalk or trail connection back to 80th Street, as well as when to implement a connection up to Quamaclit. So certainly this building would want to tie in and capitalize on the opportunity to have PED connections. So they now have that information as they work through site revisions based on the feedback that they get from concept. Great. Should I keep talking about these next 2? This site would need to meet Minnehaha Creek Watershed District rules. The city ordinance requires that wetlands, including, not butters, buffers. It's the second location where I
know.
autocorrect somehow magically to butters over buffers, should be located in outlots that would be deeded to the city. But something that would be different on this particular project is that the proposed stormwater management features, so if they need to build a pond or a filtration basin or have any specific infrastructure to treat stormwater runoff, in this case, they would be located in drainage and utility easements, but they'd be privately maintained by the commercial landowner because there's no public infrastructure, public roads draining to those facilities. We're required through our MS4 permit to make sure that in the case of those private facilities that there's a maintenance agreement in place that lays out what those requirements are. Minnehaha Creek, in the case of Victoria, takes the lead on what that maintenance agreement would look like. So that would be a part of their permit requirements. We would just make sure to get a copy of it so that we have that in the file for the development. Utilities are already stubbed into the property. When we extended sewer and water along Highway 5, when the water treatment plant was built, we did provide stubs into the site. So that's one aspect that's ready.
Thank you, Kara. There was a neighborhood meeting for this proposal. It was held on December 19th at the Clock Tower building prior to Planning Commission that evening. While we were in attendance, approximately 5 residents showed up, and their initial comments included concerns about sight lines from the backs of their homes across the wetland to this site, as well as wetland preservation and having a commercial building not directly adjacent, but backed up to their yards. And then the Planning Commission reviewed this during their meeting last week. We didn't have any residents in attendance, so we didn't have any comments received. The Planning Commission comments generally include concerns about morning traffic and vehicle stacking through the drive-through uses, as well as light pollution to the residential properties and how that would be resolved. Also, potential future uses of the fire station to the south with the construction of the new fire station in the future, and access to other businesses across Highway 5 from this site with the roundabout. And then similar to the last project, just a summary of the deviations that were presented this evening. The connectivity features, no current sidewalks or trails being shown, but potentially anticipated with the future roundabout. And then parking deviations for the bank and coffee site. Additionally, the site does not butt up directly to our right-of-way, which is typically a requirement in our central business district for 65% of the building. This would not meet it. It would be a 0% requirement because the building isn't along any adjacent right-of-way, as well as the drive aisle reductions by 1 foot and the conditional use permit requirements, which are not being met or need further evaluation. So with that, no action is required from the council this evening, but staff is encouraging discussion on the items listed on the screen, and staff and the applicant can stand for any questions you have.
All right, very good, thank you. Council, questions, comments on this? Councilmember Roberts, want to go ahead?
Sure. I don't have much. I just would say, where we came from, like you said, 2 years ago, right? I know there was 3 buildings there. I definitely like this better. I think it just felt too cramped when we had the 3 buildings there previously. Is there a way, we've talked, right, about eventually when the roundabout is there, right, there'll be pedestrian crossings to get across 5, but is there, maybe because of the wetlands it doesn't work, but is there trail options like to that area, to the houses that are on that side, or does the wetlands make that pretty much impossible to do other than building them?
Yeah, Councilmember Roberts, just trying to picture it off the top of my head, between grade, elevation changes, they're going to have to build a pretty significant retaining wall, and then the width of the wetland, I don't envision that there'd be a corridor to accomplish that off of 5.
And then my only other, I guess, would be, I know I would be more for changing the commercial use to residential, or the use permit, yes, for just phase 1 initially, and not doing the whole project, as it gives us more control over what goes in there in phase 2.
Okay, good. Anything else? Okay, comments, council?
I just had a question on the right in, right out access. Is that something that's temporary? And what's the process? How long is that temporary expected to be? What seems to be the plan for post, I'm going to say, removal of the right in, right out, correct? So if things time out well, which I suspect that they won't, we won't have the roundabout built for time to connect to this property in the way that one would envision. So but once you plunk down that building, there's no moving it on that site to maybe a better placement now that this connectivity from the roundabout comes in. So do we have any ideas as to what kind of thoughts there are going to be for what now is this, what once was what I'll call a right in, right out snake, because it's exactly what it looks like when you look at an aerial view. I do have concerns about how much pavement is just sitting here that was once wetland, that is residents' backyard, that is just now looks like a radio-controlled car jamboree out there. So,
sure. So
comments about that.
Councilmember Avansky, specific to the roundabout timing. So the sketch that was provided, the developer's engineer didn't have the benefit of having the roundabout layout. They had a sketch, but now CAD files have been shared, so they'll be sure that whatever they proposed for connection to the roundabout works to accommodate the right in, right out, and the future roundabout. So there doesn't have to be any major movements within their parcel. It'll just be in the connection area that they'll resolve those things. We don't yet know the specific phasing for the 5 improvements. We're looking at a large window of time to construct everything. As we start to move into spring, we'll start to understand what the recommended phasing is, and to the extent that we can marry the 2 together, that would be ideal. But we're still at the sketch plat phase, so also don't have the luxury as I sit here to know of knowing the developer's preferred timeline. But they know all of those things, and we're working closely together to work through them so that it doesn't become a problem.
Anything else?
For now, I think that's it.
Member Gunderson.
Will our conversations next week address the businesses across Highway 5? And that was a major sticking point when this first came up. So I want to start there.
Yeah, definitely. So the preliminary design that I've seen so far for the 5 improvements are cognizant of the council's direction to not negatively impact those existing businesses in favor of fitting the roundabout in. So I haven't seen any negative impacts to the gas station access, and no, essentially the Cabin Fever driveway stays where it is today. So still preliminary design, they're still working through the details, but the design team is aware of that, and the applicant here is aware of that. There was some discussion about whether or not the roundabout could be shifted further towards the gas station, and there just isn't room to do that without negatively affecting those existing businesses, and the council was pretty clear that you didn't want to see that happen, so.
In terms of impacts to the neighbors, then to the people living there, I can speak from experience that it is eye-opening when you go from one view to looking into someone's bedroom out your living room window, and that happened to us. And so I'm not sold on us doing anything in this location that negatively impacts what I would guess would be property values. And this is the first site that you see when you drive into Victoria, coming around the bend and slow down from the other side. We talked about coming in from the Waconia side, slower speeds. This is the area where we start to slow. Well, they should have slowed down a little bit sooner, but seems to be the area where they're slowing down. Anyway, so anything that we do here, I think needs to fit with what we are. If we're the City of Lakes and Parks, the first thing people can't see is a parking lot and a building. Hopefully we can find something that works. But to that end, I'm still there. So I think if there's something that we can get that doesn't develop at all, but you know, that's what that.
Anything else? All right, just a couple of comments here from me. I actually prefer a commercial use in that piece of property. It feels better to me than residential right along Highway 5. So I'm in favor of rezoning. I agree with Councilmember Roberts. I think I'd like to rezone this by phase as opposed to all at one time. I'm concerned about making sure that the neighbors are mitigated to the best of our ability on this thing, and I'm also a little worried about the car stacking for the coffee drive-through. That I don't know how many cars we can stack up there, but I've seen that be a real problem in some places, and everybody needs a cup of coffee at 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning. Is the restaurant hours of operation for the restaurant? 7 to 7. 7 to 7. Okay, very good. So that's helpful to me. At least we don't have late night stuff going on. I also want to echo what Councilmember Roberts said about the 2 buildings versus the 3. I think that's a really good, positive move forward on that. Pedestrian connections, super important. We have that, that great regional trail. As many people as we can get on and off that thing as possible to our benefit. I think that is all I have to say.
I have 2 additional questions
Yeah.
that I thought of while you're talking. So to try and mitigate sound and light for those houses there, I mean, is it possible to do something like we've seen, like I think Roars is doing it, like whether it doesn't have to be the big steel, right? Like we have over here in the parking lot, like something that helps so that, that helps block light, so they're not getting headlights shined into their houses or whatever. I think that would probably be a good thing to think about. What can be there that helps mitigate that light and sound.
I can let Mike talk about the elevation.
Yeah, Mike, why don't you come on up to the microphone? Otherwise, we can't hear you. So. No, we can't hear you.
Yeah, we put a lot of thought into that, especially after chatting with the neighbors. There's I believe it's 3 homes, right, contiguous to the fire station that a lot of their concerns was the visualization over the wetlands and the lights. So there's really 2 aspects to that. One is the headlights from the cars. There's a fairly substantial elevation change on this site relative to where those houses sit and the firehouse sit, where it's dropping quite a ways. And so with that, the effect of that is a retaining wall. And when you look at cars on grade and the way that they're intended to circulate on that site, a lot of those headlights dead end into those walls, into those retaining walls. So it blocks a lot of that direct line to the homes. The second factor of light that we're currently studying is your circulation lights. So your parking lot lights that are up on posts, so they are a bit higher. So neighbors could see that. There are different techniques we can implement on looking at how do we diffuse them at certain times of day, how do you direct them so you still get the same or sufficient lumens in the parking lot, but it's not affecting the homes. And so we're doing those studies right now to try to implement a lot of those things where it's the least amount of impact to the neighbors. And then the third aspect of that is landscaping. So when we have these larger retaining walls, we do have that opportunity to landscape fairly sufficiently on tops of those and around them that can create the shrubbery and different landscaping that can block and diffuse that light. And so when you look at the different elevations from the homes behind it, you're really almost looking over the site because of how far it drops. And as long as we can deal with that landscaping and light, we think we're going to minimize or really eliminate that effect for them.
Great.
One other thing I was going to talk about too, and I wanted to mention this just operationally, we talked a little bit about parking. It's been a bit of a challenge on this site, although one of the aspects of Hometown Bank and their unique operating model is they combine the coffee and banking activity together. And so what we operationally believe there is sufficient parking there that folks that are coming in to buy coffee are typically doing the banking activity and vice versa, or they're really that stacking for the drive-through. So we do believe it's not a standalone coffee shop and restaurant. It really is kind of multifunctional, and so we do believe that's sufficient. That's it.
Councilmember Gunderson.
Just to that end, with the warp speed and banking changes, intended use, I can tell you I haven't been in a bank in over a year. Mm-hmm. You've got a coffee shop there. So how long will it be Hometown Bank into the future where it's not all of a sudden now it's a different building, or you build it 2 years down the road, the neighbors think, okay, they're comfortable with what it is now, what it's proposed to be. 2 years, 3 years down the road, Hometown Bank isn't Hometown Bank anymore. Mm-hmm. Whoever it is no longer needs the size of a building. They shut the banking operations down, and we're either sitting with an empty building with no use and a coffee shop, or an empty building, or something that now the neighbors can't live with, or wasn't what it was intended. So, where are you at with intended use? And
well, yeah, if you don't mind. So part of that is really hometown specific, but the other thing is that difficult to predict, what that looks like in the future. Although I will say this building and this whole surrounding area is very purpose built for that operating model with the bank. And as a developer, could I come up with a handful of creative ideas? Yeah, I don't want to do that in front of hometown because I believe they'll be successful and be there for a very long time. But I'll let Monica speak.
Yeah. Hi, Monica. Can you introduce yourselves for us,
Yes,
please?
Monica MacDonald, and I am a resident of Victoria and vice president of Hometown Bank. And so I'll just say a little bit about our bank. We're 100 years old this year, started with our roots down in Redwood Falls, Minnesota, and have very slowly grown throughout the 100 years. But we are in growth mode right now. We are building in Carver. 10 years ago, we built in Waconia. 7 years ago in Shakopee. So yeah, we're working here in Victoria, and then we're also, they're putting the roof on in 2 weeks on our Carver building. So very strong, we're growing, we are not looking to be acquired at any point. But from a more of a Victoria resident, I mean, we can't not do commercial development because you don't know what the future is. I mean, then we would never put in a restaurant. We would never put in a bar. I mean, that just seems like a difficult way to approach commercial development. Then we would just, seems like never put in anything else in Victoria. So, just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Mr. Paulson.
Hi, it's me, Jim.
Hi, Jim. Come on up to introduce yourself. What's on your mind?
I read the staff report and thoroughly, I think, and I saw no reference in there to ambulances. Now, historically, when medical office buildings are built, they are really the generator for the hospital to create patients. Typically, they have at least one and probably two ports for the ambulances to be in. And they also come with lights and siren. So I guess that's my 2 cents, and I'll leave it with you.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. So at some point, when the use for that property becomes apparent, we will address that for sure. Thank you for that. All right, council, anything else on this issue before us? Staff?
I was just kind of having still some questions, like in terms of mitigating the impact to the existing residential structures. What's the practicality of moving everything closer to 5 and backloading the parking and some of that
Mike?
traffic so that we're not, and then, just kind of more hometown bank questions. Is it essential to have a drive-through banking facility in this day and age? I mean, or is that the business model that you need to have a drive-through banking? Can you cut down some of this pavement that's sitting here and some of the traffic that's going to be flowing through, and just is by having a banking model where people just simply come into the bank if they need it, as opposed to conducting transactions? I mean, everybody, I think, lives in a world where they know about mobile banking and can do many of those transactions. Are we potentially building a lot of infrastructure to serve a clientele that is not going to really consume those services going forward?
I'll try to address both of those. But one of the first part about kind of building location, circulation, pavement, one of the most challenging things of this site was wetlands. It's a fairly restrictive site when it comes to the wetlands, and what was prior to us being involved with the layout of the multiple buildings. One, there was a lot of density in this area, and it didn't take into account the wetlands. And so we've worked hand in hand with the watershed district to say, how do we design a use for this site without any impact to that wetlands? And how do we design it to fit within the buffer setbacks and requirements that they've put forward? And this plan that you see does accomplish not impacting any wetlands. It goes to all of their buffer requirements, all of the requirements with the watershed, with the stormwater, et cetera. And so they were very happy with how we ended up laying out this site. Unfortunately, I have seen the Minnesota roundabout design. Their roundabout design does impact the wetlands a little. There's not much we can do about that. We were a little discouraged after we did all that work to be out of there, and their roundabout did impact it. But the benefit of their roundabout design is we've now been able to lay out the circulation with sidewalks and things that we've already talked about, that we just haven't finalized that design, but I have seen it, so that's happening. As far as operationally, really the only thing I can attest to from our relationship and partnership with Hometown Bank is, as Monica mentioned, they are growing. It is a model that's been super effective. I encourage you to, if you get a chance, to go over and grab a coffee in Waconia at the bank and just see the activity. It's a different model, and they're really geared after that small town, hometown feel, where a lot of that mobile banking is going to the big guys, the big banking arms. So I just, if growth is a factor of that, they're doing a nice job, and I think they want to continue to grow, not retract.
Mike, can you not squeeze one more foot out of that drive-through?
Maybe. We have started looking at that too, and stacking's a real issue,
Yep.
the curving, we need circulation for emergency vehicles, so there's a lot of factors that go into that. I don't know if we're gonna get there. We're gonna get really, really close, but I don't know if we'll hit the exact 27 feet.
I'm still a little confused. The roundabout, when it comes online, is it going to tie into where this in-out entrance is, or is it going to
So
tie in further east?
I don't know if you have an image on there that there was a small overlay.
Yeah, I don't think we have that in there. It'll tie in with their entrance location.
And it won't create problems for access while they are working on it?
We got to coordinate all that going forward, but
Actually, if you go back to that picture, that was the one more there. So if you see that triangle where that right in, right out is, that triangle actually fits the physics, I guess, of the roundabout, how it will circle through there. And so what we've worked directly with the state on, or their engineers, is that curvature of all of our entrance and exits will match exactly their curvature of the roundabout, which will minimize the impact when they come in and do that improvement. We have not figured out exact coordination yet on the in and out while they're doing the construction, but we just started looking at that with them and trust there is a path to do that, to
Okay,
coordinate
so I think you've answered my question. So it's not as though the roundabout is going to shift the entrance into this complex up where the phase 2 is. It's
correct.
No, it's
gonna
right where it
stay
is.
exactly where.
At commercial.
So
That's right. All that gets into, once you go up to that, the medical side of that, that's significant wetlands up there where you can't access it.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else? Mr. McCann, anything that you need from us further?
No, that should do it.
Good.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, very good. With that, I'm going to, seeing no more discussion, and staff has clear feedback, that's all they need from us tonight. There are no more bodies, or nothing to come before the body this evening. So we're going to adjourn the workshop, and then we're going to take about 5-minute break, and then we'll open the city council meeting. So council, can I get a motion to adjourn the workshop, please?
Motion.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We will be back in about 5 minutes while we change over the